Before I tell you this story, I need to ask you something, and I don't want a quick answer. I want you to really sit with this in the quiet of your own mind. Have you ever lived in a place where you were constantly reminded that you didn't truly belong? Not shouted at, not beaten, not locked in closets, just reminded. In the subtle way the air changes when you walk into a room, in the way a glance lingers too long on your shoes, your hands, your face, in the way a conversation stops, abruptly, unnaturally, when you enter. If that question touches you even a little, if it makes your chest tighten just a fraction, pause right now and drop a comment below. You don't need to explain. Even a single word is enough. Just say yes. And before we continue, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications, because stories like this aren't short. They are lifetimes compressed into minutes, and you don't want to miss how this ends. Now, listen carefully. I didn't understand the word orphan when it first applied to me. It felt like a medical diagnosis, a condition I had contracted. Adults said it in hushed tones, as if lowering their voices could soften the jagged edges of the meaning. But words don't change reality, they only delay understanding. I understood loneliness long before I understood death. I remember standing in rooms where people spoke around me, not to me. I remember the feeling of being handed from one adult to another, like paperwork that needed signing, a file to be processed, not a boy to be held. When you're an orphan, people don't see a child first. They see a responsibility, a logistical problem, and responsibilities are always temporary. Then came the Harringtons. I remember the day they came for me vividly. The air smelled of rain and antiseptic, that distinct smell of institutional hallways. They didn't hug me when I arrived. They didn't kneel to my level or ask me how I felt. They stood tall, like statues visiting a museum, inspecting the exhibit. Mr. Harrington extended his hand, grown-up to child, formal, clean. His grip was dry and firm. "Welcome," he said, but the word had no warmth. It sounded like a contract being countersigned. Mrs. Harrington smiled politely, a smile that was all teeth and no eyes, and said, "We expect honesty and gratitude in this house." Gratitude, that word followed me like a shadow. It became the currency I had to pay for my existence. Their house was large, quiet, and terrifyingly orderly. It was a museum of a home. Everything had a place. Shoes aligned like soldiers in the hallway. Voices measured, never rising above a conversational hum. Emotions contained behind polished wood doors. I was shown my room, not a bedroom, not my space, just where I would be staying. The distinction was subtle, but I felt it. It was a guest room that never felt like a guest room. I nodded, I said thank you, I meant it, because when you're an orphan, safety feels like luxury, even if it's cold, even if it demands a price. At first, I thought I could earn love if I followed every rule perfectly. I treated my childhood like a job interview I could never pass. I woke up early, before the sun, just to be invisible. I learned the creaks of the floorboards so I could move without sound. I cleaned without being asked, scrubbing floors until my knees ached, dusting shelves that were already clean, organizing pantries by size and color, hoping that if I was useful enough, they might forget I wasn't theirs. I never argued, I never raised my voice, I never asked for seconds at dinner. Their biological children, Daniel and Claire, were different. They were vibrant, they were loud, they were allowed to be children. But it was more than just permission. It was a fundamental difference in gravity. The house revolved around them. I just orbited. I remember a summer afternoon when Daniel was 12. We were playing in the backyard, one of the rare times they included me. We were throwing a baseball. Daniel threw it wild, and it smashed through the garage window. The sound was sickening, shattering glass, followed by a heavy, guilty silence. When Mr. Harrington came out, his face was red. He looked at the broken glass, then at Daniel, then at me. "Who did this?" he asked. His voice was low, dangerous. Daniel looked at his shoes. I think he threw it too hard," he mumbled, pointing a shaking finger at me. It was a lie, a clumsy, desperate child's lie. But Mr. Harrington didn't ask me for my version. He didn't look for the ball. He just looked at me with a weary disappointment that hurt more than shouting. "Go to your room," he told me. "We expect better from you after everything we've given you." Daniel wasn't punished. He was comforted later for being upset by the incident. That day taught me a lesson I never forgot. In this house, truth was secondary to hierarchy. Daniel was blood. I was circumstance.
When I turned 18, they called it freedom. It happened on a Tuesday, a gray, nondescript afternoon. There was no cake, no celebration, no good luck banner. They simply handed me a small envelope of cash, enough for a month of rent if I was lucky, a duffel bag of my old clothes, and advice that sounded rehearsed. I stared at the envelope for longer than I expected, feeling the paper between my fingers, wondering if it was enough to carry me into a life I had never truly been prepared for. The weight of the duffel bag felt symbolic, as if every thread of my past was being packed into a single bag, ready to be carried into uncertainty. I wanted to ask if they felt anything, remorse, pride, regret, but the room felt empty, as though the walls themselves were complicit in their detachment. "No hard feelings," Mr. Harrington said, clapping me on the shoulder. His hand felt heavy, final. "You'll be fine." I noticed how stiff he was, how his eyes flicked past me rather than meeting mine. His hand lingered for a moment that felt like it could crush or comfort, but did neither. Instead, it was just a hand, a gesture emptied of warmth. I realized in that instant that freedom had a sharp edge. It was liberation with a cost I was just beginning to understand. Mrs. Harrington stood by the door, arms crossed, already mentally rearranging the furniture in the room I was vacating. "This builds character," she added. "No hug, no safety net, no call us if you need anything. Freedom without support is just abandonment with better branding." I could see the wheels turning behind her eyes, the calculations and judgments, as though my departure were a minor inconvenience in a day already scheduled. For a moment, I imagined a life in which someone might watch me leave with a sense of longing or care. But then I knew that wasn't my story, and it never had been. I remember the sound of the front door clicking shut behind me. It wasn't a slam. It was a soft, well-oiled click, the sound of a vault closing. I stood on the porch for a moment, listening to the silence of the house I had just left. The porch light flickered once, a dying bulb they hadn't bothered to change, and then went dark. The darkness seemed heavier than the absence of light. It pressed against me, full of years of unspoken words, missed chances, and lessons learned too late. The air smelled faintly of old wood and cold polish, and I felt that the house itself was exhaling as I stepped away, letting me go at last. I walked down the long paved driveway, the gravel crunching under my boots like broken bones. I didn't look back. I knew what I would see if I did. The curtains drawn, the TV flickering blue in the living room, the world continuing exactly as it had before, just minus one unwanted variable. With every step, a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration swelled inside me. I was alone, yes, but for the first time, the world felt like it could be mine, not assigned to me, not dictated, but mine to shape. And even in that moment, I felt the tiniest spark of anticipation for a life that had nothing to do with the Harringtons' rules or expectations. The first few years were a blur of survival. I worked jobs that didn't require a name tag. I cleaned office buildings at night, pushing a gray cart through endless cubicle mazes. I remember the specific hum of the industrial vacuum, a low, angry drone that vibrated in my teeth. I remember the smell of the cleaning chemicals, acrid, artificial pine that clung to my skin even after I showered. I ate meals from vending machines. I slept in a room so small I could touch both walls if I stretched out my arms. Every night, I lay awake listening to the city hum beyond my window, a mix of distant traffic, sirens, and the occasional bark of a dog. I imagined other lives unfolding in warm apartments with laughter and voices, and I felt both envy and determination. This life I was forging was harsh, but it was mine, and I began to understand that survival was not just about food or shelter. It was about carving out a sense of self in a world that didn't notice you existed. I learned that hunger isn't just a feeling in your stomach. It's a fog that settles over your brain, making every decision harder, every memory sharper. It made me notice things I would have overlooked otherwise. The way sunlight hit the alley behind the office building at noon, the patterns the pigeons made when they circled the park, the way strangers' faces crinkled when they smiled. Hunger sharpened my senses, honed my instincts, and slowly taught me the art of persistence. Every missed meal, every sleepless night became a teacher I had no choice but to listen to. But I survived. I built a small, quiet life, a studio apartment with a window that faced a brick wall, a used car with a dent in the passenger door, a job in HVAC repair where my hands were always dirty, but my paycheck was always mine. I started to take pride in the minutiae of independence, the smell of clean laundry, the hum of my heater on cold mornings, the way I could fix a leaking pipe without asking for permission. My life was small, yes, but every small victory felt monumental. Every day I left work with grimy hands, I also left with a little more confidence, a little more proof that I could exist outside the framework they had tried to impose. While I was building my life floor by floor, brick by brick, the Harringtons were losing theirs, not all at once, but in a slow, agonizing erosion. I watched from a distance, partly detached, partly fascinated, as the empire they had constructed with so much pride began to crumble. It was an irony that tasted bitter, but satisfying. The same system they had designed to maintain control over everyone else could not save them. It started with their health, as it often does. Mr. Harrington had a stroke. It happened on a golf course. Irony of ironies. It wasn't fatal, but it was a thief. It stole his balance. It stole the crisp authority of his voice. It stole his independence. He needed care. He needed patience. He needed someone to manage the details of his life, the pills, the appointments, the hygiene that he could no longer control. I remember feeling a strange detachment when I heard. Not glee, not vengeance, just a quiet observation. Life had a way of equalizing debts and realities. The man who demanded control over every inch of my childhood was now subject to forces he could not manage. Naturally, they turned to their children. They turned to the investments they had nurtured for decades, Daniel and Claire. And this is where the tragedy truly began. Daniel was the first to distance himself. He was a successful lawyer now, living 3 hours away in a glass-walled condo in the city. When Mrs. Harrington called him for help, he didn't say no. He just managed the conversation. He spoke about billable hours and career trajectory and partner track.
He offered money, but never time. I imagined him pacing in his condo, the skyline reflected in the glass, talking through a headset, scheduling reminders for a man who used to yell at me to straighten my room. Money was his version of care. Everything else was inconvenient. He visited once a month, sat stiffly by his father's bed, checked his watch every 6 minutes, and left before dinner. I heard from a neighbor that Daniel was seen at a steakhouse 20 minutes after leaving his sick father, laughing with colleagues, ordering expensive wine. He treated his parents exactly the way they treated me, as an obligation to be minimized. The irony was perfect and cruel. They had raised him to be successful, not dutiful. They raised a CEO of his own life, and CEOs don't change bedpans. Then there was Claire. Claire tried for about a week. She moved back in to help Mom. But Claire had never been taught to endure discomfort. She had been raised to believe her happiness was the priority. She had been raised to believe that mess was something other people cleaned up. She had no experience with patience that demanded sacrifice. She lived in spaces where everything was polished and predictable. This sudden immersion into chaos, smell, and dependence was a shock to a system never tested. When the reality of caretaking hit, the changing of sheets, the slow feeding, the erratic moods of a sick man, the smell of sickness that no amount of air freshener can hide, she crumbled. I heard the story from the housekeeper before she quit. Claire broke a nail lifting her father's wheelchair. A small thing, but it broke her. She stood in the kitchen, sobbing, screaming that she couldn't handle the smell. "I didn't sign up for this," she reportedly yelled, throwing a glass into the sink. "I have a life, Mom. I have friends. I can't be a nurse." She packed her bags the next morning. Mrs. Harrington stood in the driveway, watching her daughter, her prize, her princess, drive away in a convertible bought with Harrington money, without looking back. I imagined the exhaust fumes curling into the sky, carrying with it the remnants of a childhood spent under unrealistic expectations, leaving only dust and silence.
That was when the silence truly descended on the Harrington house. The two people they had poured everything into, the bloodline, the legacy, had vanished. The hallways, once alive with the rhythm of carefully scheduled meals, polished floors, and polite conversations, became echo chambers of emptiness. The portraits on the walls seemed to watch, their painted eyes reflecting a family that had abandoned its own. Dust gathered in corners that had never known stillness, and every step through the house reminded you that absence leaves a presence all its own, a quiet, hollow presence that lingers long after the noise has gone. The professionals came next. They hired nurses, but hired help requires respect to stay, and the Harringtons had forgotten how to speak to people they viewed as subordinates. The nurses arrived like strangers crossing a battlefield, uncertain, wary, carrying the weight of other lives they were now responsible for. The Harringtons barked orders, corrected accents, questioned methods, and found fault in the smallest gestures. The house, once a showcase of meticulous control, began to reveal its cracks, not just in the walls or the floorboards, but in the very way the Harringtons related to the world around them. There was Nurse Sarah, a patient woman with 3 kids. Mrs. Harrington fired her for humming too loudly while she worked. There was Nurse David, a strong man who could lift Mr. Harrington easily. Mr. Harrington insulted him daily, correcting his grammar, treating him like a slow child. David quit after 4 days. "I don't need the money that bad," he told them. Each departure was a small victory for the universe, a quiet reckoning that the Harringtons could no longer rely on force or expectation to command care. The house began to smell different, less like antiseptic and order, and more like a living organism left unattended, stale, sour, slightly decayed, yet alive in its neglect. The agencies stopped sending replacements. They were blacklisted. The house, once a museum of order, began to rot. Dust settled on the polished surfaces. The garden grew wild, weeds choking the prize roses Mrs. Harrington used to boast about. The facade was cracking. The smell of the house changed from antiseptic and lemon pledge to something stale, like old paper and unwashed laundry. Windows remained closed, cobwebs formed in chandeliers, and the air felt heavier with every passing day. Friends, distant neighbors, and acquaintances stopped visiting, quietly avoiding the house that had once been untouchable. It became a monument to their own mistakes, a testament to what happens when one invests in appearances rather than human connection. That was when Mrs. Harrington texted me. It had been 7 years. Her message was polite, almost casual. "We were thinking of you." She didn't mention Daniel's absence. She didn't mention Claire's abandonment. She tried to slide me back into my old slot, the silent, useful fixture, the problem solver, the boy who fixed things so they didn't have to. I didn't reply to the first message, or the second, or the third. By the 5th message, the pretense dropped. I could almost hear her mind racing as she typed, imagining me obedient, willing, ready to step back into the role I had long ago rejected. But I had changed. I had grown in ways she could not predict, shaped by struggle, solitude, and the quiet victories of independence. "Your father is sick," she wrote. She called him your father now, a title he never earned, a title he explicitly rejected for 18 years. "We need help with the house. The kids are busy. They have such important lives. We thought since you know the routine, since you know how we like things done." Since you know the routine. Even in desperation, she couldn't help but reveal the truth. I was the backup plan. I was the safety net they hadn't bothered to maintain, assuming it would just be there when they fell. It was a strange, cold revelation. For years I had been the invisible thread holding their household together, expected to appear and perform whenever convenience demanded. Now, even in crisis, they still saw me as a utility rather than a person. I finally called her back on a Tuesday evening. I sat in my small, paid-for apartment, listening to the phone ring. My hand wasn't shaking. My heart wasn't racing. I felt a strange, cold calm. When she answered, she didn't say hello. She didn't ask how I was. She just started crying. A jagged, ugly sound. The sound of a woman who has never been told no, suddenly facing a universe that doesn't care. She listed their grievances, the ungrateful children, the incompetent nurses, the unfairness of it all. We gave them everything. Daniel, Claire, we gave them everything, and they just left us. I let her finish. I listened to the silence that followed, the space where I was supposed to step in, the space where the old me, the boy who wanted to be loved, would have said, "I'm coming, I'll fix it, I'll save you." Instead, I took a breath. "I'm sorry you're going through this, Mrs. Harrington." The silence on the other end was deafening. She heard the title, Mrs. Harrington, not Mom, not Mother. "Mrs. Harrington," she choked out, "after all we did for you, after we took you in, we gave you a home." "Yes," I said. My voice was steady, quiet, unyielding. "I appreciate the roof you put over my head. I appreciate the food. But I am not your son. You made sure of that. And I am not your staff. I can't help you." "But we have no one," she screamed. It was a raw, terrified sound. "We have no one left." "I know." And then, gently, firmly, I hung up. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel revenge. I felt light, as if a heavy coat I had been wearing for 20 years had finally slipped off my shoulders. I realized that freedom was not a thing handed to you. It was something you claimed, step by step, decision by decision. And sometimes claiming it meant letting go of people you had long been trained to obey, even when they called themselves family.
I heard later that they sold the house. It went for under market value because of the disrepair and the smell. They moved into an assisted living facility, a nice one, with manicured lawns and polite staff, but a facility nonetheless, a place where they were managed, where their schedule was dictated by someone else, where they were told when to eat, when to sleep, when to shower, where they were just 2 more files in a cabinet of responsibilities. Karma didn't strike them down with lightning. It didn't need to. It just gave them exactly what they gave me, a life managed by strangers, a life where affection is professional, not personal. And me? I'm still building. My life isn't perfect. I still have days where I feel that old phantom ache of not belonging. But then I look around at my small, quiet life, a life built with my own hands, on my own terms, and I realize something. I may have been raised as a guest in someone else's home, but I am finally the owner of my own. I plant my own garden of small victories now, cultivate friendships that are chosen rather than assigned, and allow myself to rest without guilt. Each day feels like a quiet assertion of ownership over my time, my body, and my heart. I laugh when I want, I cry when I need, and I make mistakes without fear of judgment. And in that ownership, I found something unexpected: peace. Not loud, not celebratory, but a deep, unshakable peace. I learned that love is not something you inherit by obligation. It is something you earn, something you choose, something you nurture. And I, for the first time, could choose it freely. I could choose my friends, my work, my routines, my failures, my triumphs, all without apology. I began to notice the small things, the sunlight hitting the wall in the morning, the rhythm of rain on my window, the smell of coffee brewing, and I realized that happiness is composed of these small, fleeting moments strung together into a life that belongs entirely to me. I even started small traditions for myself: coffee at sunrise on my balcony, watching the city wake; a plant I named Gertrude that somehow survived all my forgetfulness; weekends at the flea market where I could talk to strangers without fear, without past ghosts hovering over every gesture. I began keeping a journal again, filling it not with the rules of others, but with my own observations, dreams, and minor triumphs. Each entry felt like another brick laid in the life I was finally building for myself. Every morning I wake, the brick wall outside my window doesn't feel like confinement anymore. It feels like a canvas, blank, waiting for what I will create today. Because I know this now: freedom isn't just leaving a house. Freedom is building a life where no one holds the title of owner over your heart but you. And for the first time, that life is mine. Every hardship, every betrayal, every moment of neglect I endured has led me to this: a life that is wholly mine, a life where I decide the terms, a life where I am both architect and inhabitant. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more thoughtfully crafted, emotionally powerful stories. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that matter.